Hello, welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Young-Gil Kim. It's been almost a year since President Joe Biden took office, and the Biden administration has steadily shown its willingness to engage with North Korea while maintaining sanctions on the regime. While being open to the possibility of having a dialogue with Pyongyang, Washington is committed to keeping U.S. forces on the Korean Peninsula in a readiness posture. Today, I'm going to have a one-on-one with General Robert Abrams. General Abrams, until July this year, served as commander of the UN Command, ROK U.S. Combined Forces Command, and U.S. Forces Korea. He'll share his views on where the U.S.-South Korea alliance stands as the U.S. seeks to strengthen its security ties in the Indo-Pacific region. General Abrams is joining us from Missouri through satellite internet. We appreciate your understanding. General Abrams, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks very much for having me. And it's a great honor to be here with you and your audience.
First of all, North Korea is continuing to advance its weapons programs despite being on a self-imposed moratorium on nuclear and long-range missile testing. This year alone, we have seen quite a number of occasions that North Korea tested its short-range missiles. How serious are they as a threat to South Korea and U.S. forces in Korea?
Yep. But look, before answering that question, I just want to remind your audience that it's General Retired Abrams, and today I'm speaking as a private citizen and not a representative of the Department of Defense. So here's my view. Look, I think while the tests themselves are not serious threats, they're not serious threats. Some people want to call them provocative. I never felt provoked in 2.5 years as the UNC CFC USFK commander by a North Korea missile test. But we ought to be really clear-eyed about what it means, because the continued development of these solid fuel ballistic missiles, that is a serious threat to the Republic of Korea, our Republic of Korea, U.S. forces, and Japan. Solid fuel, simply stated, means these missiles can appear from underground facilities, hide locations, and they can fire very quickly, which makes it very difficult for alliance targeting operations. And these latest missiles are much, much more accurate than the older 70s era liquid fueled missiles, and they carry a much larger payload. And we believe, of course, that all of them are nuclear capable. So yes, the tests are not serious, but these missiles are a serious threat.
Mm-hmm. Earlier this month, the U.S. and South Korea agreed to update their war plans. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and South Korean counterpart Seok agreed on new strategic planning guidance, which will be used to revise joint wartime operations plans. Why did the agreement come at this point? Why now?
The current plan for the defense of the Republic of Korea is based on strategic planning guidance from 2010. It is 11 years old. When I arrived in the Republic of Korea in November 2018 and did a detailed review of the current war plan, and then after conducting my first exercise as the commander of UNC CFC and USFK in March of 2019, I recognized that we needed a new war plan to account for all the changes since 2010. And I'll talk about some of those changes in a minute. I submitted my official request for updated strategic planning guidance in the summer of 2019. And at the SCM in 2019, the Minister of National Defense was not supportive of the need for new SPG, although no specific reason was given. And I was asked to conduct more review of the necessity for a new war plan. I provided that assessment to both the ROK Ministry of National Defense and the U.S. Office of the Secretary of Defense. in April of 2020, and ROK Ministry of National Defense still would not support the needs of me as the CFC commander. And I believe what happened now at this SCM is that Secretary Austin must have drawn a very strong position with his counterpart. So in short, this is long, long overdue, in my opinion.
Was the existing guidance not enough to deal with North Korea's current nuclear and missile capability?
The North Korean threat's all well known. We've talked about it. The threat has evolved, right? Short-range ballistic missiles, enhanced artillery systems, sub-launched ballistic missiles. They've got a ground-launched cruise missile now. These are all threats that did not exist in 2010. We need to account for them. And then the last piece, of course, is the People's Liberation Army under the control and command of the Chinese Communist Party. It's not a secret that they have increased their presence in and around the Korean Peninsula since 2010. It's significantly increased. In fact, just in the last 3 years, a 300% increase in violations of the Korea Air Defense Identification Zone. That we're seeing increased number of Chinese fishing boats illegally fishing along the northern limit line. So these are all indications of things that have to be accounted for in the war plan that the current SPG does not contain.
During your time as the commander of U.S. Forces Korea, it was widely reported that you expressed a cautious view to the South Korean officials about the transition of the wartime operational control. How far has the preparation for the OPCON transition come up to now?
Well, cautious, I don't think that's the right word on my view to describe my view as I engage with my counterparts in the ROK JCS and the Ministry of National Defense and other places. I merely expressed my commitment and the alliance's commitment to the bilaterally agreed to plan from 2015. Some people wanted to take shortcuts or lower the standards to what our two nations agreed to. Some people objected to me holding them accountable for meeting the standard that was agreed to. I believe that the conditions-based plan is well thought out. It took 2 years to develop this plan and agree to it. And it was all based, its fundamental basis is the Republic of Korea acquiring the capabilities necessary to lead the combined defense. It is detailed and comprehensive. And I assess that not much progress was made until 2019. In fact, I've said many times, in 2019, the alliance made more progress than the 3 previous years combined. And the key element is acquiring critical military capabilities. And acquisition of military capabilities takes money in the form of defense budget, and it takes time.
All right, then, well, what is the minimum condition that South Korea needs to make sure, and the U.S. needs to make sure before completing the OPCON transition? Is that the acquiring those capabilities?
Sure. So we don't talk in terms of minimum or maximum, right? There's one standard. And I think part of the challenge for you and your colleagues in the media and the Korean people is that the plan is classified. So we're limited on how much detail we can share with everyone. But in short, what we do say publicly is that condition 1 is the Republic of Korea must acquire the critical military capabilities to lead the combined defense. That translates into 26 discrete systems. 26. In addition, there is a couple of additional tasks for Condition 1, which includes certifying that the future CFC, led by a Korean four-star general, would be capable of leading the combined defense. Condition 2 is the Republic of Korea must acquire a strategic strike capability and develop and field a Korean integrated air and missile defense capability. And that one, frankly, we're furthest behind on.
Then, General, what should be the goal of the upcoming transition? Is it to make South Korea be able to respond unilaterally if a war breaks out on the Korean Peninsula?
Let me be clear about a couple of things. One, the Republic of Korea, like every sovereign country, has the inherent right to self-defense in the event of an attack or a hostile act. Right? That's true now, today, with an American four-star general as the CFC commander. It'll be true in the future when a Korean four-star general is the CFC commander. Okay? But once that initial attack or hostile act occurs, then the alliance response, it's an alliance response, not a unilateral response. It's not a U.S. unilateral response in the Korean theater of operations. It's not a Korean unilateral response. So when people say, will South Korea be able to respond unilaterally if a war breaks out? By agreement between our two countries, it's an alliance response. And that alliance response is governed by strategic documents, a strategic directive and terms of reference that our countries have agreed to that describe how those decisions will be made.
Let's move on to the defense readiness of the U.S.-ROC alliance. The U.S. Defense Ministry and U.S. forces have been maintaining the position that they will allow the U.S. diplomats the space and the room to continue negotiations with North Korea. And we have witnessed some scale back of military drills on the Korean Peninsula. Is the military readiness unshaken?
When I left Korea on the 2nd of July this year, I was satisfied that we were maintaining an appropriate level of readiness based on the threat. I think if there is a return to the pre-2018 hostile actions, hostile rhetoric from North Korea, then I think exercises should increase in size, scope, and volume. But I think for the time being, we're in a good place.
Mm-hmm. North Korea is not coming out to the talks, and it doesn't show any willingness to resume negotiations anytime soon. And many people wonder if it is more reasonable to restore the reduced or canceled military drills. What's your view on this?
I think it's time for the alliance to have some serious discussion on whether it's time to resume some aspects of our combined training that we have curtailed. So, I would ask you and your colleagues, when was the last time you saw or heard a report of a U.S. carrier strike group operating in Korean waters or near the Korean Peninsula? Or when was the last time you saw a U.S. fifth generation fighter training in Korean airspace? Or when was the last time there was a reported U.S. strategic bomber conducting a training flight over Korea? It's been quite some time. So when some experts suggest that the U.S. has not matched North Korea's moratorium on ICBM and nuclear weapons testing with equal concessions, I immediately point to those three activities.
So you're saying the U.S. and South Korea have done enough already?
It seems like we've matched their self-moratorium appropriately. And by the way, the reduction in our activities, we weren't violating any UN Security Council resolutions, but in fact, ICBM testing and nuclear weapons testing are both violations. So the fact that North Korea gets credit for not violating sanctions, I have difficulty understanding the logic. But I think that the alliance, has done plenty to meet North Korea halfway.
I see. And serving in Korea, you wore three hats: commander of the UN Command, commander of Combined Forces Command, and commander of US Forces Korea. And there was some controversy over the role of the UN Command. Some people, for example, argued that the UN Command is interfering with the inter-Korean relations. What do you say to those arguments?
I say to those who think that the United Nations Command is interfering with South and North Korean, inter-Korean relations, I say it's preposterous. It is completely baseless. And I'd like to give you a couple of examples. So many of them like to refer to the inter-Korean railway assessment. That was an idea that was thought of and agreed to in the summer of 2018. That survey required review and approval by the United Nations 1718 Committee. That UNC has zero role. I've said this 100 times, I'll say it again. The United Nations Command has no authority or responsibility to enforce UN Security Council. The only responsibility it has is to adhere to those Security Council resolutions as they relate to Korea in 1950. So specifically UN Security Council resolutions 82, 83, 84, and 85. UNC does not enforce sanctions. As a matter of fact, this is a fact, once that request had cleared the 1718 committee, it was approved to cross the MDL, the military demarcation line, within 24 hours. Within 24 hours, it was approved. Second one that gets a lot of attention is about Tamiflu delivery. If you'll recall, the winter of 2018 and 19 was particularly difficult flu strain in North Korea, and they were desperately in need of some Tamiflu. That request, because I was now the commander there, that request to deliver Tamiflu across the military demarcation line was approved by me within 18 hours of when the request was submitted. Now, why wasn't the Tamiflu delivered? Well, Liz, you'd have to ask the Ministry of Unification, because they had the lead for coordinating that delivery to North Korea. I can go on and on. Every one of these, UNC does not enforce sanctions. It's as simple as that. So it was very frustrating.
Yeah, why do you think there was then criticism of the UNC among some of the people in Korea?
Well, first off, criticism of UNC is not new. Was not new in 2018. I mean, it's the criticism has gone back a long, long time, because it's an unfortunate reminder, right, of the Korean War, and in 1953 in July, unfortunately not reaching a final peaceful settlement. We have an armistice agreement, which has prevented the restart of the war now for 68 years. It is a system. The armistice agreement is the only internationally legally recognized instrument that has prevented the restart of the war. In the end, the UNC commander is responsible to adhere to the armistice agreement, and that's kept the war from restarting now for 68 years, and we should continue to do that.
Meanwhile, South Korea's Moon administration continues to push for an end-of-war declaration. Your view regarding this issue has already been widely reported, but could you elaborate on that?
I continue to give this great thought, and what I guess my question is, I'm very unclear what it is we are trying to accomplish by declaring an end of war. But I think any premature declaration of an end of war, you open up the possibility for people who will then claim if the war is ended, then it's time for us to revisit some of those Security Council resolutions from the summer of 1950. And then it becomes what we call here a slippery slope. You may end up, because there will be nations that say, well, if there's a war ended and the United Nations Command was established to fight the war, then we don't need United Nations Command anymore. If you don't have United Nations Command, well, they're the only signature to the armistice agreement. Well, then we don't have the armistice agreement anymore. So we end up backing our way into a peace agreement or settlement, and we haven't made 1 inch of progress on denuclearization. And this has been, argued back and forth between the United States and the Republic of Korea for over 30 years. What comes first, peace or denuclearization? It wasn't much of an issue 30 years ago as it is today. But today, North Korea has a credible nuclear threat.
The U.S.-South Korea alliance has historically been focused on countering threats from North Korea, but there seems to be a growing desire from the U.S. side to collaborate with South Korea as part of Washington's Indo-Pacific policy. How do you see this?
I think this is a natural evolution of our relationship between the United States and the Republic of Korea. It's natural as our relationship has evolved from a strictly military relationship. Now here we are, 71 years later. The Republic of Korea is a thriving liberal democracy. We have a lot of the shared same values, right? Rule of law, freedom of speech, a constitutional government. We have a shared market economy, and it's not new that the Korean military and the Korean Ministry of National Defense has aligned themselves with other U.S. military operations. I'd like to remind people, when I was in Korea, that there was 2 Korean divisions in the Republic of Vietnam, South Vietnam, during the Vietnam War, under the command of my father, right? We've had Korean forces deploy in support of other U.S.-led operations in other places of the world. So I think that what we're talking about with regards to the Indo-Pacific strategy it's a natural evolution of our relationship, and we'll just have to see where it goes. I mean, this is clearly in the diplomat's lane, but I think it's a natural evolution.
And my final question for you today, you served almost 3 years as a commander of the U.S. Forces Korea. How do you look back at the time you were in Korea?
Look, my wife and I, we have so many great memories. I have lifelong friends that we made while we were in Korea. There's a couple of senior Korean military members who I consider they are my brothers from another mother. I mean, we got to be very, very close. We have a deep love and appreciation, and so our only regret is that, unfortunately, because of the pandemic, we were not able to travel and visit as many parts of Korea and the region that we wanted to. That's actually our only regret. And I will tell you, finding good Korean food here in the Midwest is proven to be a little difficult. I have managed to find at least one decent restaurant, but I miss all our friends, but I miss good Korean food too.
Hope you can go back to Korea soon and then explore more of the rural parts of the Korea.
I hope that happens. I hope the pandemic gets under control soon. And
All right. General Abrams, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Liz, thanks very much for the opportunity. I hope we can do this again sometime in the future.
U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan has recently said the U.S. diplomacy with North Korea would be making step-by-step progress towards the ultimate goal of denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. However, North Korea remains unresponsive to U.S. overtures, with the new year being just around the corner. And that does it for this week's Washington Talk from Voice of America. Please join us again next week for more analysis.